Great to see you. I went recently to a seminar run by Gallup. It was an online seminar. I don't know if you've come across Gallup. It's one of those organisations that does lots of surveys, and it was a survey about workplace health and well-being and that kind of thing. And they'd taken stock over the last couple of years and tried... So I'm booming a bit, Ollie. Is that better? I could hear it coming back in my head. And they'd taken stock over the last 2 years. They'd noticed 5 big things that had changed over the last 2 years. One was what they called the Great Resignation. That is that they'd really struggled to keep people who were stars in the workplace because it's been such a difficult time. There was more autonomy, more flexibility, but there'd been the Great Resignation. Many people were giving up on their jobs, big changes. The second was they're not coming back, that 70% of people now wanted to be more flexible about how they worked and weren't wanting to come back into the office. Hence you think of Jacob Rees-Mogg talking about the civil service and whether they return back to the office. It's much more of what's called a gig economy, whereby it's temporary, flexible jobs are commonplace. And so you tend to focus on giving jobs to contractors rather than to full-time employees. And then there's the big focus on well-being, on the family life and the balance between those, which has been, they felt was a new emphasis over these last 2 years. And then there was this focus on burnout and stress. And for many people, burnout and stress was a very big thing over the last 2 years. And finally, they said, the other thing they noticed as they were taking stock was the relationship between the employer and the employee. Less of a kind of boss and a worker, and a different paradigm, a different way of relating. Just taking stock over the last 2 years. It's a little bit like when you go for a walk and you've just gone up that little steep bit of hill, or I love scrambling here in the lakes, and you scramble up this rock, you get to the top and you half a bit and you look where you've come, and sometimes the taking stock can be just the last bit. But sometimes, especially when you go for a walk, and I love going walk up in the fells here, when you take stock, you've reached a particular summit or particular point, and you look back at where you've come from, right back to the car or where you started, way below, and you look up ahead to what's coming next, and you've got this whole panorama set out before you. There's a sense in which this conference, this event, is rather like a taking stock. And it's not just of those 2 years, not just of the recent events. There's a sense in which, we're thinking about the whole of life, where we've come from and where we're going. That big picture takes stock. And there's one psalm in the Bible which has got this real whole of life perspective. And that's Psalm 71. If I said Psalm 71, you might think, what's that about? It's not your typical Psalm 23, the Lord's my shepherd, or Psalm 51, the confession. And what I thought we'd do is just to look at this for a few minutes together. What I've done is I've given you a fresh translation that I did a couple of weeks ago, and so you can try and feel the vividness and the expressiveness and the rawness of it. And also by giving you this translation, I hope you've got the handout that's just here. A few little boxes there that I hope will be helpful as we navigate our way through and look at it. But I want you to notice as we read, think about time references, okay? And the kind of picture of life that's in view. So here we go. In you, Yahweh, that's the name for the Lord. In you, Yahweh, I take refuge. Let me never be shamed. In your righteousness, may you deliver me and rescue me. Turn your ear to me and save me. Be to me a rock, a dwelling to come to continually. Would you give the command to save me? For you're my cliff, my stronghold. My God, rescue me from the hand of the wicked, from the palm of the unjust and the oppressor. For you are my hope, my Lord Yahweh, my trust from my youth. On you have I leaned from the womb, from the stomach of my mother. You have been my protector. In you is my praise continually. I've been like a sign to many, and you've been my strong refuge. My mouth is full of your praise, your glory all the day. Do not cast me off at the time of old age. When my strength is ending, do not abandon me. For my enemies have said of me, and those watching my life have taken counsel together, saying, God has abandoned him. Pursue and seize him, for there is no one to deliver him. God, do not be far from me. My God, hurry to my help. Let them be shamed and come to an end, those who attack my very self. Let them be clothed with disgrace and insult, those who seek my harm. But as for me, I will constantly hope, and I will add to all your praise. My mouth will tell of your righteousness, all day long of your salvation, though I don't know how to count. I will come with your mighty acts, my Lord Yahweh. I will commemorate your righteousness, yours alone. God, you've taught me from my youth, and until now I tell of your wonders. So also up to old age and grey hair, God, do not abandon me until I tell of your right arm to a generation, to all who are to come, your strength and your righteousness, God on high. You who have done great things, God, who is like you? You who have let me see straits, many and harmful. May you revive me again, and from the depths of the earth bring me up again. May you multiply my greatness and turn around and comfort me. And I too, will confess you with the harp, your faithfulness, my God. I will sing to you with the lyre, Holy One of Israel. My lips will resound when I sing to you, my very self which you have redeemed. Also my tongue all day long will tell of your righteousness. For they have been shamed, for they have been reviled, those who seek my harm. Don't you think it's a wonderful psalm? One thing that's very striking about the psalm is it uses lots of words that are found in other psalms, lots of words and phrases. Sometimes we say, sing to the Lord a new song. It's a mark of God doing a new thing, that we sing a new song. But sometimes there's a moment when words from the past resonate with fresh force as we sing them, as we say them, as we pray them, as have people all through the generations. We join with thousands of people through history who've done that. So, for example, I don't that often use the Anglican book, the Book of Common Prayer. Does anyone use the Book of Common Prayer? Tiny number of people. There's a lovely, lovely little phrase in there, whom to serve is perfect freedom. Do you remember that phrase? We may not know where it comes from. And suddenly that's full of, that picture is just so wonderful. To serve the Lord is perfect freedom. It captures something. I'm joining with saints through history who've prayed that prayer. And it's exactly the same here with this psalm. It picks up on words that have been used in the past many times over. So that's very striking, I think, for me. And did you notice that over and over again we have this kind of picture of a plea, God, would you do something? And then there's a kind of reason for doing so. Did you notice that? So if we look back to the start, for example, it starts, in you, Yahweh, I take refuge. And then the request, let me never be shamed. In your righteousness, may you deliver me and rescue me. And it continues down to verse 4. My God, rescue me from the hand of the wicked. And then it gives the grounds. It says, verse 5, for you are my hope, my Lord Yahweh, my trust from my youth. On you have I leaned from the womb. And then it continues again in verse 9, the same picture. Do not cast me off at the time of old age, when my strength is ending. Do not abandon me. And it continues like that down to verse 13. And then verse 14, but as for me, I will constantly hope. I will add to all your praise. So oscillating between prayers of request and prayers declaring trust and confidence in the Lord, what God's done in the past for him and what he's going to do in the future. But did you notice the current situation that he's in? Did you notice the current picture? I was very struck by it. On the one hand, do you notice verse 10? My enemies have said of me, and those watching my life have taken counsel together, saying, God has abandoned him. Pursue and seize him, for there's no one to deliver him. So there are enemies who are out to get him. There's something very striking here. In fact, this came up last night as I was chatting with Keith Brown last night. And we were observing that the phrase, those who watch my life, normally when you find this phrase in the Psalms and elsewhere, this is a picture of someone who's a caregiver who watches for good. But here the people watching have turned from being caregivers to being enemies. They're watching with a different purpose. And Keith was observing how much intra-family fraud there is now with people in older age. He was telling the story. I don't want to take your thunder, Keith. You may be going to say a bit later on about an example where children defraud their parents of money, and those who are supposed to look out for them are in fact exploiting, taking advantage of them. And that's for me one of the big concerns about euthanasia that's coming in. The very people who are meant to be providing care and watching for good can turn to be watching for harm, ultimately. So in this very moment, it's this picture of the enemies that's there. But did you also notice there's something very striking here? If you look down to verse 20. It's not just that enemies have been against him. He looks at his own life and he says, you, Lord, it's you have let me see straits. I use the word straits here because it's the picture of narrow, of confine. It's sometimes just translated distress. But it's that sense of being constrained and squeezed. And not just one or two, but they're many. And they're not just incidental things. They're harmful. They were tough to experience. So it's not just there are enemies out there, but God, you've let me experience. I don't know what your experience of your life has been. We've thought already. I suspect there's not a single person here who's not experienced straits, many and harmful and tough. We're here today from that point of view. But do you know what else he does? He's concerned not only about his enemies like this, he looks to the Lord and what's happened, and his fear at this point in time. I put in the red box. Did you notice in verse 1? Let me never be shamed. This isn't about feeling shame as an individual emotion. This is about your place in social order in society. It's the sense of you're on the front page of the newspaper and you're being disgraced and shamed because you've been exposed and humiliated in front of others. So that's what he's afraid of. That's his situation. I mean, not exactly our situation, but that's what he's afraid of. But you see what he does? He looks back. And what does he do as he looks back? He says, verse 5, for you are my hope, my Lord Yahweh, my trust from my youth. On you have I leaned from the womb, from the stomach of my mother. Looks back to a life lived of, Lord, I've looked to live your way. I've had some hard times, but I have looked to honour you. Maybe that's your experience. I suspect for many of us here, I don't know how many years of discipleship. I think of someone like John here. Was it 50 or 60? Gillian saying the same with the interview in the retiring world. Maybe some, it's more recent we've got going with the Lord Jesus Christ and committed ourselves. Maybe there might be one or two here who you've never really committed your life to Christ. And what a great time to do it this day, this week. But you look back to a time of God's faithfulness. Look now to this moment of challenge, of struggle. But one of the things as he looks back, I think this is very, very striking, and I've again highlighted this, this is the one psalm more than any others that has this word righteousness in it. Sometimes translated in our Bibles, faithfulness, because he's picking out God's extraordinary faithfulness or righteousness that he's shown. Did you notice that in verse 2? In your righteousness may you deliver me. And it comes down to verse 15. My mouth will tell of your righteousness. And 3 times more over the page on the second part of the psalm, it's your righteousness. So as he's got this whole life before him, as he's taking stock, he says, I've started, I've kept going, I've been faithful. If you're going to complete the phrase, I've started, what would you say? So I'll finish. Where's that from? Mastermind. Do you remember? It's the beeps at the end. And this is the phrase for the psalm. I've started, I've been with you, the Lord, and you've been with me all the time, your faithfulness. And this resolution, this resolve, so I'll finish. And did you notice, this is, I guess, for me, the heart, the centre for us. Verse 18. John was thinking last night and telling us about some of God's purpose for old age. We're going to distill verse 8, the psalm here. Verse 18. As he looks back to the past, so also up to old age and grey hair, God, do not abandon me until I tell of your right arm, this is God's strength, to a generation, to all who are to come, your strength, and your righteousness or faithfulness, God on high. That's the heart of it. Lord, don't abandon me to the grave. Keep me going. Because I've got a job to do. I've got something to pass on to the next generation, the intergeneration we've thought about. So powerful, so striking. And as we finish, I want to talk to you about a hymn writer. I wonder if you know who this hymn writer is. I'm going to read a little bit about this hymn writer, see if you know who they are. Because often we come across hymn writers and we think, they're writing a hymn because they've had some extraordinary trauma or experience or that kind of thing. But let me tell you a little bit about this hymn writer. See if you know. Born in a log cabin in Kentucky in 1866, he lived a pretty unremarkable life. He worked as a school teacher, a newspaper editor, an insurance agent. Then he retired and spent his remaining days at the Methodist Home for the Aged in New Jersey. He wrote, my income has not been large at any time due to impaired health in the earlier years, which has followed me on until now. Although I must not fail to record here the unfailing faithfulness of a covenant-keeping God, that he's given me many wonderful displays of his providing care, for which I'm filled with astonishing gratefulness. Anyone know who it might be? Anyone know where the hymn might be? No, it's not Is Well With My Soul. That was a personal trauma that gave rise to that. Yes, it's Thomas Chisholm. It's Great Is Thy Faithfulness. There's most extraordinary hymn, but a very ordinary life. Like our lives. A very ordinary life, but a hymn where you can look back and see God's extraordinary faithfulness in the past. You can look at the present. It's been tough. I've had enemies speaking against me in some ways, those who should be watching my life, who are causing me difficulties and harm in different kinds of ways. And Lord, you've shown me I've experienced straits, distress, confines, many, and hurtful. It's been tough. But I've seen your faithfulness at work every moment. And Lord, don't abandon me until I've passed on to the next generation, until I've told the next generation of your wonderful faithfulness. Or, in the words of Magnus Magnusson, I've started, so I'll finish.